Hey, this is Deji and
Chris.
welcome to the Lot 1 podcast. On today's episode, we talk with Ryan O'Quinn about how to start your own production company. Let's get into this show. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So for the people at home who didn't get the sides, can you give us a little backstory on your character?
Sure. On my character.
Maybe not your character. Maybe about you just as a person.
A bio.
I can be anybody you want me to be, Deji. We just
Okay.
spent 25 years hitting a mark and saying a line. Actually, that part's not true, but that's good. That's a good segue. Firstly, I live in LA and have for 27 years and counting. I came here as an actor, not unlike probably some of your listeners. You know, I quote, got off the bus figuratively over 25 years ago with high hopes of being on film and television. Probably the age-old story of big fish in a small pond, and came from the East Coast. Back in the day, we stapled a resume to the back of a headshot and got a landline phone and waited for the agent to call in that way. The first 3/4 of my career in front of the camera as an actor primarily, and then in 2015, so about 9 years ago, I often say accidentally backpedaled into producing. It was never the plan to be a producer, but sort of accidentally stumbled into producing because of a project that I was in, and now I kind of split my time, probably a little more time spent on the producing side as opposed to the acting side nowadays, but still do a little bit of both. So if you would have asked me, how do you become a producer, which may be one of your questions, but years ago I would have said, well, start in the mailroom and work your way up, or start with a few $1 million, neither of which I did. But that's probably a whole story that we may get to. Yeah, for better or worse, been in the business for nearly 3 decades at this point. My wife is in the business and is a producer as well at my company, and we specialize in primarily family content. Family and faith content is sort of our forte, and we have a relationship with a studio now, and we're leaning into content that sort of edifies and amplifies positive messaging. So maybe that's probably, I don't know if that's a long version or a short version, but that's the nutshell version.
It's the version we wanted.
Yeah.
Good.
So I do have a question. So you have a production company, and I think that sometimes can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. For you, what does that sort of entail? Like,
great question. And I'll start with the name of the company, which was really stolen from my loan out company as an actor. So at risk of getting into the weeds on loan out companies, and you could probably do a whole episode just on that. But for tax purposes, oftentimes actors will have a production company entity wherein the production company, the production company will pay that company that will pay the actor ultimately. There's a whole lot of pros to that. And so years ago, I came up with the moniker Damascus Road Productions, squarely stolen from the Bible, based on Paul's journey in the Bible from going from Saul to Paul. He had what we often say is a Damascus Road experience, where he was transformed. He was changed because of an interaction with God. And so I just grabbed that name because I thought that, the projects that I lean into more are projects that are give or take projects of transformation, some kind of a change. Best case scenario, there will be a real good versus evil kind of story, and good always triumphs in the end. When we had the opportunity to launch our own production company, this would have been in 2015, like I said, I just parlayed that name from my loan out company into an S corp and filed, and we launched our studio brand under that. But in answer to your question, we are a relatively small shop. Right before we were talking, before we started here about COVID and all things COVID and how that sort of upended the industry in a lot of ways. But we were about 13 people strong at my production company. I say I definitely need to include my wife into this, Heather O'Quinn, who's my wife. And I don't say this because she's my wife, but it's certainly the best producer I've ever worked with. I dragged her into this business kicking and screaming. She was not she did not want to be in this business at all. And sort of acts, I sort of pulled her into the business. But now she's great. I couldn't do what I do without her. So she and I together formed a production company. I was in a feature called Believe that Sony Pictures did, and it came out in 2020 Christmas of 2016. I was the face of the movie, literally and figuratively, I suppose, the face of the movie. I was number one on the call sheet, but I also helped wrangle and pull together financing for it. And again, now we're getting into the weeds of what a producer does in some instances, I suppose. But I was instrumental in pulling everything together. Again, this was not my plan, but partly out of selfish ambition and some semblance of vanity. I really wanted this movie to work. I really wanted the project to get off the ground. I really wanted to play this role. And so I started turning over all the rocks, and I started looking for resources and financing and calling friends and peoples and scrape together, $4 million or so to put this movie together. Sony eventually came in and distributed the picture for us. But in retrospect, I realized what I had done. You're a producer. That's what you did. And Variety or Deadline, once the cat is out of the bag and you are seen as a producer, and in that particular case, Sony saw me as a liaison to the faith and family marketplace, because that was the genre of the film. And so they saw me, like I said, literally and figuratively as a face of the movie. And so we worked closely with, at that time, Smith Global Media and Sony Pictures Home Entertainment to release the movie into the marketplace. And so all of a sudden become a producer. And once Deadline or Variety says you're a producer, I can tell you right now that every sycophant friend since third grade rolls out of bed with a script all of a sudden, and you've got something on your hands. But like many other peoples in this town and production entities, there's only so many meetings you can take in a Starbucks and people stop taking you seriously. So we realized that if we are a production company now, according to the state of California and everybody else, we really need to look at what that means in terms of our infrastructure. So one of our offices is in Westlake Village. Many of your listeners are probably in the LA area. So we're in the Conejo Valley, west of the San Fernando Valley, in the Westlake Village part of the city. And we were really fortunate. We took over the former home of DTS Sound. So back in the day, DTS was instrumental in creating what we now know as surround sound, of course. So the screening room, which is right behind my head on the wall on the other side of me, is the original lab where DTS created surround sound technology for movies. So we stepped into some really good bones in terms of the physical edifice that we're in, and with a screening room. And since that time, we've expanded to a music studio, 2 music studios, a live music room, an ADR space, a post facility, and a podcast room. So we continued to grow within the complex in either direction here and in our physical facility. And then we've slowly added more and more people to the mix, including, a vice president of production. We have a distribution arm of our company now. We have some readers. We have some people who are not on, not W-2 employees, but are rather 1099 employees. That was part of that group of 13 that I mentioned prior to COVID that we've managed to retain, as an independent contractor sort of label. So we're still hovers, depending on the day, between 10 and 15 people working at the company. So
nice. And so
anyway, long-winded, boring answer to your question. For sure, but
you
encompassed
opened
it.
so many questions for me as a fellow business owner. I've got so many questions. What's your pipeline?
That's a great question, and the short answer is it depends. We've done all of the above. We released a picture in 2020 called Paul's Promise, and that picture came to us with another production company attached. So a producer named Michael Davis from North Carolina had the rights to the film and came to us and said, "Hey, great story. I think your company is right for this. Would you consider coming alongside us in a co-production capacity and also help finance the picture?" So in that case, we partnered up with another production company. We shepherded it all the way through production, and then when we got to the distribution phase, we also by that time had a distribution wing within our company. So we actually released theatrically through a wing of our company.
The Lot 1 podcast is brought to you by the Tourist Hat Coffee Company. You know what keeps me running on those long film sets, Stagey?
What's that, Chris?
Coffee. And you know what's the worst thing ever?
A swift kick in the pants.
No, bad coffee. So that's why I choose Tourist Hat Coffee Company's high quality coffee beans. Their artisan roasted single origin coffee and handcrafted blends are so much better than those stale stuff you get from those other brands.
Yeah, those things are bad.
Tourist Hat Coffee Company's coffee is artisan roasted, micro roasted, single origin, and their small batch roaster that handcrafts their blends to maximize peak freshness upon delivery. Family owned and operated. What more could you ask for from a coffee company, Deji?
I literally can't think of anything else.
If you're still not sold, a portion of each purchase goes towards contributing to some of their favorite nonprofit organizations, such as Animation Dance Community, Seeds of Hope International, and Beautiful Gate Orphanage.
These guys are good.
Make Tourist Hat Coffee Company your new go-to quality coffee choice with our exclusive offer for you, the Lot 1 podcast listener.
Oh, listen up, guys.
First-time customers can use the code LOT1BOGO at checkout to receive 1 free bag of coffee when you buy 2. That's right, Deji, a buy 2, get 1 free.
Whoa.
So head on over to touristhatcoffeecompany.com and use promo code LOT1BOGO at checkout. Again, that is LOT, the number 1, BOGO at checkout. Whether you work in the film industry or not and want a delicious cup of coffee, this is the perfect time to stock up on your favorite blends of coffee or try something new. I know I'll be brewing Tourist Hat on my sets moving forward, Deji. Again, that's promo code LOT1BOGO, LOT, the number 1, BOGO at checkout to claim your buy 2, get 1 free. Terms and conditions apply. Tourist Hat, coffee that fuels your adventure.
In other cases, real world example, we're looking at a picture right now that's a co-fi and a co-pro with another production company. So we're kind of doing the same thing that in that scenario that I mentioned before, where we actually have the rights to the film and the story and option the book rights and the life rights. And now we're partnering with another production company. We will be boots on the ground producers along with that company up to the distribution phase. It's a bigger project, bigger budget. We need the resources and backing of a studio. So we'll partner with a studio that'll come in for the distro piece and P&A financing, and then we'll still be involved with that. And really, honestly, it comes down to most of the time where and how we fit into that depends on budget. So sub $5 million in production budget, we're usually shepherding the process beginning to end. Once you get north of, honestly, 8 or certainly 10, but probably $8 million or so, we find it's necessary to enter into a co-fi, co-pro partnership. Number one, everybody's got skin in the game, not all the skin in the game, but also, utilizing the resources of a major or a mini major when it comes to P&A and distribution.
Which one do you guys prefer?
Yeah, we and again, that answer depends too. So given the opportunity to shepherd a project beginning to end, that's always just a great feeling, to say the least.
Yeah.
Just to know that we had a hand in creative, from impetus through distribution. Now that said, it's kind of the old tale of do I actually want to be on the bus as part of a bigger project and enjoy the ride, enjoy the vacation on the projects that stars fill in the blank name that we would all recognize, right? Mm-hmm. Still be listed amongst the producers that helped with that. So there's value in that too. There's value in that IMDb star meter, believe it or not, where people go, do I actually want to work with this person? And what have they done? And what have they been a part of? Oh, they were in a project that also included fill in the blank producer that has way more credits and better known name than I am, but I was also intimately involved in the process. So as we build the company, we're doing a little bit of both, if that makes sense.
I'm sure you're valuing that as you go when a project comes your way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we're kind of that, I don't know, lower to mid-tier production entity where some things that come through the door is just really great IP and great content, but it just doesn't make sense to tap the full resources of our company at the C-suite level. So we will, our VP of production, for example, started out as my assistant, Taylor Cole, who 8 years ago, was manning the phones and looking at calendar and is matriculated up the ladder and is that great, again, age old tale of somebody who started at arguably the bottom and is now the first stop when it comes to deciding what or if any projects that we want to take a look at deeper. So he's arms akimbo with me in terms of being the first, line of, if you get through and past him, then he kicks it up to the next level. But Depending on what the budget is and what the resources are needed, sometimes he just produces the whole thing. We've had projects that came through the door that we never touched, that he just ran with.
As a small business, that must feel real nice to be able to trust someone at a level to be able to just do that and help build the company while also being able to flex their creativity and their skills.
Absolutely, Christopher. And that, that's really a testament to finding the people that are like-minded and understand the model and the goal of the business. I have a little mantra on the wall here that it says, the theater, meaning the movie theater, the theater is the church for the world at large. It's where people go to sit in the dark and contemplate life. So for every one of our employees, they understand the mission and the message of the company. And our goal is to certainly not to change a life. I can't do that as a human being, but we strive to identify content and stories that have, that change element, like I mentioned with the name of the company, that will, at the very least, we want audience members to say, quote, I never thought of it that way. At the end of the day, if that happens, we've done our job. So all the members of our team understand that, even at the coverage level, some university students and grad students who we've engaged to help curate content for us, who are that first line of when it comes through the info@ email address, they have the responsibility and understand what the company's trying to do and can kick it up to the next level, the next level, the next level. But it's surrounding ourselves with a great team that gets the mission of the company.
What is it like being a family focused, family based content in an era of filmmaking? The industry's contracted a little bit and the focus is just strong IP based, superhero entertainment. Are there struggles there? Are you finding that, we have our niche and it's working really well? What is it like navigating that type of environment currently?
Internally, and I think the numbers prove this. We do a lot of data on where, and I think any savvy production entity / studio tries to figure out where the market is going. So with the success last year, we were involved with a film called Sound of Freedom last year that opened in July of 2023, and it opened up against Indiana Jones. Any person in their right mind, including me, by the way, would say, don't do that. That is just completely insane. $187 million in the domestic box office, $400 million in the worldwide box office to date, and still going. We're not looking at streaming numbers, but what that said to us was, we're in a zeitgeist moment where there is an underserved audience, period. And if we can serve up content, audiences will show up. Now, that's not to negate the Marvels and the whatever, the superhero movies of the world. I mean, we saw just recently what record-breaking numbers that Deadpool and Wolverine did, which was incredible. We all woke up on that Monday morning and went, "Oh my gosh, it's a new day."
Thank
just
goodness.
When you think superhero movies are dead, right? I mean, we've seen this past summer that audiences will show up. So, but I also think there's a market where, given the right fare, and it doesn't have to be crazy, super expensive budget-wise movies, but Unsung Hero and I Can Only Imagine, and what the guys at Kingdom Story are doing with Lionsgate, and what we're currently doing at STX, and there's an opportunity to get the right people in the right spots at the right budget level to serve up content that, quote, middle America will show up for. And so when done well and marketed correctly to that demographic, it's going to be a win in the box office. So we're excited right now about where we're going as a company, but more importantly, where this niche genre is heading, with being able to put butts in seats at a theater still.
I kind of want to go back a little bit to sort of talk about the impetus and how you start a production company, because you said that you kind of backed into it.
That's an undertaking right there.
Yeah, it's certainly an undertaking, and honestly, again, it was not the plan. If you look at the tax form, I was just an actor for the first 15 years of my career. That's what I thought I was, and what the IRS thought I was, and that's what my wife married, and that was what I was doing.
Yeah.
But it was really, honestly, it was that movie that we did with and through Sony, and part of it was realizing that I had some modicum of information or knowledge that was needed in the room at the time. And this is a real world example. I was at Sony in Culver City, giant marketing meeting, as we were trying to figure out what date to release the picture theatrically. There were 21 marketing executives around the table, and I was invited, as on behalf of the film, as one of the producers, as well as my assumption was I was going to listen to what their suggestion was, which would have been certainly valid and I thought way more important than any information I had. And at some point, they turned to me and said, what are your thoughts on a date to release? And I had done some research, and this was a faith and family picture. It was a Christmas movie, but it had faith elements in it. And I'd done some research on, audience demographics, and also some research I dived into, thankfully, right before this meeting, had dived into the American Bible Society's data on what DMAs, direct market area, what cities and DMAs are the most likely to turn out for pictures like this theatrically. And so I had this sort of chart and it makes sense. It's through the Bible Belt, and the Southeast was primarily the people that would show up for this. And so I just spouted this information that I just learned about comps, like genre movies and comp movies, and when and where they had opened, how many theaters they had opened in, and what dates they had opened. So I said that out loud in the meeting, and sure enough, 21 other people, wrote down that information. I thought, why are you guys listening to? You're the studio. Why are you listening to me? So honestly, Chris, it was kind of in that moment that I realized I have maybe some semblance of proprietary information that is important to the studio in this case, and some information that I had harvested over the years, and relationships that I had made. And, I traveled around the country doing stand-up, improv, and sketch comedy at large platform, primarily, Christian events. And so I had a lot of relationships and a lot of Rolodex built up, and a lot of good favor with relationships. And I thought, now it sort of makes sense that as zooming out a little bit, I can utilize this information that I already have and elevate what the studio wants to do in this case, what the movie needs to do, how and where it needs to open. So it was kind of a gut punch moment in real time where I said, oh, maybe I do have something to offer that would be the things that a producer would do. So it really wasn't a well thought out up until that point kind of plan. It wasn't a path. But after that, the distributor reached out to us and said, hey, tell us more about what you know about this audience. And so for a short time prior to opening the doors of our production company, I was a consultant. So I consulted to the studios about this niche audience that I was aware of. I was the target demographic for that audience, and I also knew a lot of the gatekeepers and influencers in that space. So I was a consultant that spoke into films in that genre that the studios wanted to release, and then realized, okay, maybe I do have enough information, background, and resources to actually hang out our own shingle and call ourselves a production entity. And that's sort of when it kicked into high gear.
Interesting. I like the idea of sort of like looking within yourself and understanding what it is that you really enjoy in you. And I think that this can kind of go for anybody who wants to do this in any sort of genre or anything. It's
100%. I would encourage your listeners, viewers to do exactly that. Think about what it is that you are, and an expert maybe is too strong, but what is it that you inherently know? Is it sports? Is it documentary? Is it a certain story inside of a documentary? Like what is it that you have that would rival expert level of nearly anybody else around, and lean into that, because there is a dearth of information about fill in the blank. Arguably everybody is an expert in something, and so ignite that passion and go ask yourself, what is it that I am good at and care about and could have valuable information on? And so that might inform where what direction people go with in starting a production entity.
Hey, film industry folks, Deji here from the Lot 1 podcast. We've got big news. You can now be a VIP member of our film-loving family by joining our Patreon page. Get early access to episodes, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and connect with fellow filmmakers. Your support means so much to us, and it helps us keep the reel rolling. Head on over to patreon.com/the Lot 1 podcast, and let's make movie magic together. Thanks for being a part of the Lot One podcast journey. So when you did start your production company, who was your first hire?
The first official hire was my assistant Taylor. We were shoestringing it for a long time, just my wife and I and her sister, who was helping out as best she could. Sort of between everybody having babies and raising babies and trying to figure out what we have on our hands. All of a sudden, as mentioned, we had a physical spot. We had a brick and mortar facility with a name on the door.
Yeah.
But now we had to figure out how to do what we do. So the first hire was an executive assistant for me to help manage calendar, primarily help set up calls and manage calls and sort of the day to day. And then that quickly elevated into, and I said to him, he had gone to school here in LA, went to Azusa Pacific University near Pasadena. And after that, he moved over to Universal and was on a desk at Universal for a while. And then had just made a lateral move to Hulu and was working at Hulu. And we sent out the equivalent of a breakdown, on Indeed.com. I think it was either Monster or Indeed. I think it was Indeed, and got 1,100 submissions, Deji, the first day.
And when was this?
That is crazy.
And this would have been in 2015.
Oh,
wow.
And
for 2015, that's a lot.
I felt like a casting director who I had a manager years ago who also was a casting director. Quick side story. But he was a casting director, and he would get physical submissions. I mentioned the 8x10 headshots that we all had back in the day. And so he would instruct his assistant, by the way, to say, okay, today, Monday, we're going to toss out everything that is not full bleed. Meaning if there's a border around the photo, toss it in the trash, because we have to start somewhere. And the next day it would be ½ inch. If it's got a ½ inch border, we'll take a look at that. Everything else goes in the trash can, just because there's got to be a jumping off point. But when 1,100 submissions for an executive assistant came through the door, and me not knowing a single one of them, it was maddening. I didn't know where to start. Do you start with the Ivy League schools? Do you start with the film schools? Do you start with AFI and USC? Like, where do you even go? Thankfully, Taylor, who eventually got the job, was from my hometown. And I know that is very nepotistic and weird and whatever, but I happen to know his parents. I'm 20 years older than him, but I knew his parents and my parents were contemporaries, and I happen to know that, but he was from my same tiny little small coal mining town in Virginia, and albeit 20 years later had gone through the same high school I did. So at least I knew there was some semblance of a, quote, hometown boy, and if it doesn't work out, then whatever, I would have helped and given him a shot as well. But the success story was it worked great, and he quickly dived in. He left Hulu, he came to our company, and was willing to do anything. And that probably is another admonition worth underscoring to your audience. I said to him at one point, I know it's a slog, and I know it's menial, and I know it's beneath your ability, but just be willing to one, do the legwork, and two, be in the room, because there will come a point when someone asks your opinion. And if you are in the room, sometimes figuratively, but in this case, literally, you will have a point of view that no one else has. In his case, he's a millennial, and sure enough, probably a year into the job, year and a half into the job, we were sitting in my conference room down the hallway from where I am now, deciding on something. And I had the wherewithal, thank goodness, to turn to Taylor and say, what do you think about this? And he was literally just a wallflower whose job it was to take notes on whatever it was we were talking about. And he said, well, I think, and then he just launched into this whole idea about what it was, sort of like my experience at Sony, where I just didn't think anybody was going to pay attention. And whatever it was genius. And we all just sort of looked at each other and looked at him, invited him to literally sit at the table, and thus began our journey going, okay, he has a point of view and a perspective that I don't have, because of his age, because of the experience, because of, schooling more recently than me, all of those things. And so I realized that we had a gem of a person, under our own roof here that could really work his way up through the ranks quickly. And that's exactly what happened.
I think that's a great example of like you said, like your job isn't the greatest in the world. Like just being in the room, it's so important to still pay attention. And like, I can relate to that so much, like, especially in the earlier years in my film career of like, when I'm on set, even if people don't think I am, I'm soaking up things that they probably don't realize I am. So then when I am in that position, I know how to do that, or I know what that term means, or I know I can go grab this thing, or whatever it is. And
Yep. That is such important, Christopher, you hit the nail on the head. Film school, I think, is valuable for sure. I think at the end of the day, it's probably worth it at some point, but nothing compares to being on set.
yeah.
And hearing somebody say, I remember one of my first times on set, I heard the gaffers talk about a stinger. I was like,
Yeah.
what in the world is what? There's a shorthand, right? There's terminology and there's language, not unlike any other business, but we have a very unique dialogue and dictionary within our business that sometimes makes no sense at all. But just being on set, and like you said, 2 years ago, we were shooting a movie in Texas and we had some interns on set, and I encouraged them to take a week each and do rotations around the crew. Spend time with the camera department for 3 or 4 days, move over to HMU, spend time with vanities for 3 or 4 days. Given the opportunity, that's a great schooling to be able to be on a set. And we had one young lady who is now a script supervisor and had no idea that was even a job. Like, she was just so good at what she was good at organization. She was good at all the things that a good scriptie does. And when she got to that part of the set, she had found her home. So she sat in tutelage under and in shadow of our script supervisor, and now that's what she does for a living. But it all spawned out of exactly what you said, Christopher, of being able to just, given the chance, float around on set, find out where you fit in. You'll find what you're good at. We had a young lady who went from crafty to wardrobe department, and then ultimately ended up in art department. And she's a great, set dresser and set deck, and so she found it finally. But it was just being able to float that made all the difference.
There's a whole list of people that are on set. There's a whole list of people who are in post. There's a whole list of people who are in the distribution side. So getting a taste of a lot of these things is very important, I think.
And hopefully this podcast can also be the way that you learn about this position.
Tell you what you guys are doing is a valuable resource for any filmmaker, but particularly up and coming filmmakers who are looking to make that move. Keep tuning in for sure.
I have a question. Being a business owner in a C-suite position, but also being a producer. I mean, like, our company's really small, but sometimes I find the struggle to be able to kind of wear both hats of, like, focusing on, like, the business C-suite side of it and the administrative side of it versus, like, no, but I want to produce. Like, if we're doing our flagship show, I want to focus on that, but I still have to do all this admin work. From what I'm hearing is it sounds like you are both C-suite and you take on producing on main productions. How do you balance that, like running the business versus the going and producing?
Yeah, great question. And that's exactly where I am right now, is this kind of this precipice of straddling both, because I have been, with the exception of the last 9 months or so, I have been that boots on the ground producer, the creative, executive, first in, last one out kind of guy that helps keep it on the rails. Now I'm in a little bit different position. We have a relationship, as I mentioned, with a studio partner. And so now my job, technically within the studio system via our first look deal, is to source and curate content, commercially viable content within this genre that I'm in that makes sense for the studio. So it has transitioned a little bit. My priority has transitioned a little bit from, oh my goodness, this is a really great story. This story has to be told at all costs, to now having to evaluate, okay, what is the package? And by that, I mean, who's the director? What's the cinema score of his or her last 5 movies? What A-list talent can we attach to this? Is there a recognizable name that we can put above the title that makes sense? Is the genre of this movie synonymous with his or her audience? And that's a very important piece that I've only learned since I've been at the studio. And this is a very elementary version of it, but I'm regurgitating, the wise words of our executives at the studio who've said things like, and again, it's elementary to even say this out loud, but bring me a Tom Cruise action thriller and I'll say yes. Bring me a Tom Cruise musical comedy, I'll probably say no. Mm-hmm. Now that's a hyper version of that. But the point is, who is the audience is most likely to see that person in that role? The same studio, by the way, would have said, we would have missed Keanu Reeves in Speed because he was Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
He had not developed that John Wick audience yet, and the studio wasn't willing to take that gamble until it was proven, right? So again, long answer to your question, but now my role is a little bit different in that I have to make hard decisions that are not just based on really, really great stories, but more importantly, the bigger question of, is this going to make money?
Business,
and I know that
yeah.
that may be, something that young filmmakers especially don't want to hear. I certainly didn't years ago. There's a reason show business has a last name. It has to make sense and has to make money at the end of the day. People vote with their wallets, for better or worse. So it has to make sense in order for me to now say yes to a project. We've been with our studio partner for about 9 months now and have submitted, we get about 30 submissions a week, mostly blind submissions. We have an agent as well, and we have relationships with agents and managers and all kinds of folks around town. But we get about 30 blind submissions a week. And in 9 months, I have elevated 5 to the studio level. So if you do a little bit of math, it's the harsh reality of how many actually make it through the system.
Yeah. And that's mostly because all the elements don't quite align with
the business needs,
what the studio would sort of think could make money.
And it could be any number of things, a combination of, or any number of things, including budget, which the studio can speak into and go, oh, you're crazy. We need to add $10 million more to this in order to, so budget, talent attachment, director attachment, the full package, all of those things at first blush helps. The advice to young filmmakers is pitch decks are important, believe it or not. And be realistic in sending over that pitch deck. We know what you mean when you stick Ben Affleck on your pitch deck. We know that you want that type, but sometimes, depending on how it's presented, we know that there's not a chance that he or she would do that picture, and so it sort of comes across as amateur, right? So I would suggest grabbing names that are attainable. If you're doing a $5 million budget, find $5 million actors. We get it. But there's also got to be a little bit of give and take, and I would hone those pitch decks depending on who you're sending it to. Sometimes when a Brad Pitt is the only option on a pitch deck and your budget's $3.2 million, I laugh. So
if you like what you hear, then you're gonna love our after show even more, exclusively on Patreon. Subscribe now at patreon.com/the Lot One Podcast.
Do you mind, for the audience and also me, explaining what a cinema score is?
Yeah, cinema score, great question. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes type score that is informed by the media, people who review movies, movie reviewers, and it's kind of like a grade like school, A plus, A minus, B plus, B minus, and so there've only been, in the history of cinema, wrap your head around this for a second, there have only been 103 directors who have had an A plus cinema score, and only 7 movies from those directors that have had an A plus cinema score. The cinema score is important. We often look at the numbers index, which is a tool that's available, I believe, for free. I don't think there's a it's not like RenTrack on the distribution side where there's a fee attached to it and a gatekeeper of any kind. I think anybody can just jump onto the numbers index, but it is important because you can type in a name and see what their box office performance was when they were at the top of the call sheet, when they were in the top 5 billing, when they were in billing 6 through 10 on the call sheet. Like, what is the value of that person? I know that's a little crass to think about, but it again speaks into the business side of show business as you start to think about what is the value of a particular, in this case, actor. There's an old saying around here, you're only as good as your last picture. Well, that's crass and harsh, but partially true in the sense that people look at how or if you can open a movie and what the current trajectory of that is. And so we utilize that a lot when we're looking at, like cinema score, we'll look at things like the numbers index and sort of get an idea of how or if the movie will perform. And again, that's how studio execs keep or lose their jobs.
Let's say you're a newer production company, and you're trying to sort of, understand, wrap your head around, packaging and understanding, how do you, essentially, how do you sort of value these different elements, because before you said that there is, when you get a pitch deck with, Brad Pitt, and you've got a $3.2 million movie, it's like, well, you're never going to get that. I mean, so I guess, how does a person sort of look at their budget, and then determine, okay, well, what are the actors that are in this range that would be attainable for me?
Yeah. If you can afford it, I highly recommend engaging even if it's just a small retainer, and for one or two roles, engage a casting director. And the CSA has a great resource. I didn't even know about this until just recently, but you can send out the equivalent of a breakdown submission to the Casting Society of America, and casting directors and more often than not, casting associates or casting assistants will jump onto that site, be available to help you out. So for a nominal fee, they would be able to speak into names that I never thought. My wife is a great resource for casting, but some producers, myself included, I don't have that gear that thinks about who would be great in that role. But casting directors, throughout my career have said, have you thought about fill in the blank? And I go, oh my gosh. And so that's just one little nugget of thought there, Deji, where you can send out that through the CSA, that little resource, and at least get somebody perhaps who's at the same level as you are, whose job it is to look at just talent every single day and go, all right, this is actually who would make sense. And by the way, he or she has a new series their job is to stay updated on everything that's happening. So that's a great resource, particularly regarding your question about filling in that pitch deck, so you just don't look foolish.
That's great. I love that, actually. Because I'm similar in a way where I've recently, look at something that I hadn't seen for a long time. Twisters is a good example. I just saw that movie, Twisters. There's a couple actors in there that I had seen in something else, and I was like, oh, they're in this, like,
Right.
and I wouldn't have thought about that, because like I hadn't seen them in a long time, and so I was like, I'm the same way. I don't really ever think about who could be right in this role. I just, first thing I do is go to like the Brad Pitts or the people that are super famous, because those are the top of mind. And when you're thinking of an action star, well, Tom Cruise is a pretty good action star. So, but who could you get?
And as a filmmaker, that's where your brain has been for years. You're thinking about that, that bigger name, when in some instances it doesn't make sense. First of all, it wouldn't happen, but second of all, just, it would make sense to be realistic.
Is there a piece of advice you could give like a new production company, maybe someone who doesn't like, okay, I have some money, I want to make a movie, maybe do the festival circuit. They're not going to be able to afford even like someone at that level that you're speaking about. What's your best piece of advice to slowly like kind of step up to what you're talking about? Like, what would be the first thing, like casting wise, that you would recommend? Like, should you be looking for influencers? Should you be looking for just who's the best for the role, or someone who is background? Like, what is that?
Value certainly matters, and as well as I do that anytime you're looking to mount a project, what's the first question everybody asks? Who's in it? Even when you finished a project, I just wrapped the movie this summer, and inevitably, whether people are in the business or not, that's always the first question. So that part is important. The good news is in this industry and in this town specifically, once you're surrounding yourself with good people who understand the focus and the mandate and the mission of the company, inevitably there are 2 degrees of separation between everybody in this town. Right now, we're looking at a project with an actor who's at the top of his game and that we all know. It's hard to just call up the CAAs, UTAs, ICMs, and WMEs of the world and go, hey, let me speak to Chris Pratt.
Right.
Yeah.
I really have a project that he's going to love. But what is easier for sure, and again, it's sort of elementary to say this, but what is easier is inevitably, the further you go in this business, you find out somebody who knows him or her, and you get that script to them. based on a friend-to-friend referral. That person reads the script, reach out to their talent, and it happens at all levels of the industry, by the way, not just the A-listers, but in the case of your question, where you're kind of starting at the bottom. If you think, man, I really like this guy who had a 3-episode arc on Deadwood, whatever, and I wonder if I can get to that person. Start, as you start to research and dial down and drill down, with not too many calls, you're going to find somebody who knows that person. And then again, it's I don't think it's too big of a lift to say you're going to find somebody who knows that person. I mean, it's kind of crazy how work begets work in this town. And you guys know as well as I do that, if you're on a film for 4 weeks, 3 weeks into that film, everybody's taking every break and scrolling through their texts and emails, because work begets work. That camera department's going to roll over to something else, and you better hope that you're in the mix of the 5 or 6 folks that make the cut, right? You want to keep working. So same thing with casting and making movies, and you find your people. I had a really great friend who's now who was an executive at Sony, and I was in every film he did. He went to UCLA for undergrad, and then to AFI as well. And I was in every single project that he did from the time he was in undergrad all the way through. And it sort of followed him through and up to Columbia and TriStar, at Sony. And so it was just kind of you hear those stories, right, of people hiring the same people over and over again. And there's a reason for that. When it comes to, we just had a screening here today, and the director has used the same DP on the last 5 movies. At some point, time is money, especially in the movie game, and you want somebody who can finish your sentences. You want somebody who can grab that thing before you even ask for it. And so once you find those people, as you're in the infancy of your production company, find those people that are willing to just get in the trenches with you, roll their sleeves up. And inevitably, as you grow and the longer people stay in this business, those degrees of separation of who knows whom get smaller and smaller and smaller.
So in terms of casting, you're saying build your people so then you can kind of find maybe hire, I guess just to hone in a little bit more of are you saying to find, is it better to find new talent, friends, or is it better to find that person who was in 3 episodes of whatever show,
I think you work your way up. I think at the short film level, you're grabbing friends and good script, because what you're showing off is the ability to write, the ability to, in the actor's case, to hit a mark and say a line and evoke an emotion. You're really working your way up to a good demo reel. And by the way, I would suggest at nearly every level, go after laurels. I'm a huge fan of film festival nominations and wins. Those laurels actually mean something. Sometimes it's a dinky little, podunk film festival that nobody's heard of, but trust me when I say, as those laurels fly across the screen in the first 4 seconds of your trailer, when it does drop, people are like, I should pay attention to this because somebody thought it was worthwhile. So as you're even at the short film level, I would suggest, going after the friends and the friends of friends and just getting a really good piece of tape. And then as you work your way up to a low budget feature, you can start to reach out. And, and the great news is, particularly with actors, people want to work. There's only a handful of people who are working when they want to work. For the most part, 95% of SAG-AFTRA is willing to take a job. So you're going to find people who are willing to work and want to work. And so I would just keep working, work your way up the ladder to finding those bigger and bigger names for the project.
Yep. I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to have Chris say his question before we...
most important question.
Here we go. Yeah, I don't know.
All righty.
I'm ready, though.
What's your favorite color? No.
Dang it, you went with the hard one.
Yeah.
If you had something real quick and easy, one piece of advice, one sentence you could give our listeners or anyone who's trying to start a production company or just be a producer, what would that be?
In a sentence, surround yourself with good people. Everybody is good at something, but no movie has ever seen the light of day with one person holding the camera, saying the mark, hitting the line. I think the successful production companies have the best people in each of those roles. People will move up and move on and outgrow or make lateral moves, but you really have to have great people surrounding you that probably are better than you at what they do or you do. Any production entity is only as good as your weakest link. And if you can find the strongest people in each one of those lanes, you're way ahead of the game. So our goal has been to surround us with people who do quality work and are excellent at what they do. That way we know when we go into battle, and it, we say when you go to film a movie, we've used the appropriate synonym with being in a foxhole, right? You're in the trenches for 28 days or 35 days or 42 days. We say that for a reason, and you want to be back to back with somebody who's got your flank at all times. So surround yourself with good people.
Great piece of advice.
Thanks so much for joining us. We're gonna take the rest of this conversation to the after show. So if you like what you heard here, make sure you head on over, because we got more questions, and I'm sure that we're gonna get a lot of great stuff like we've already been getting today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
But before you go, if people want to get in contact with you,
of course,
or reach out or just inquire, how do they go about?
A good question. Thanks for asking. Well, I'm at ryanoquinn.com. That primarily is acting related stuff. The name of our company is Damascus Road Productions. So Damascus Road Prods, PRODS.com. The email address is info@damascusroadprods.com, and that will get to the right people eventually. Happy to hear from your listeners.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And then you're also on Instagram, right?
That's right. Ryan O'Quinn Official on Instagram, and same thing, Ryan O'Quinn Official Facebook fan page.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much for joining us on the show. And it was awesome talking to you. And
thanks, guys. My pleasure.
There's more later coming. So
stick with it.
Yep. Bye.
Alrighty. Bye. And that's a wrap for today's Lot 1 podcast episode.
Huge thanks to our sponsors, Tourist Hat Coffee Company. Remember to use the discount code LOT1BOGO, that is LOT the number 1, BOGO, BOGO, for your exclusive buy two, get one free deal. That's right, it's buy two, get one free. Guys, I'm telling you, if you want good coffee and you want a good deal, go on over, use the BOGO. It helps us out, helps them out, helps two small businesses. You should do it. Again, that is discount code LOT1BOGO at checkout for your exclusive deal.
Go get them, folks. They're great. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, and leave a review and share it with your alien friend from Mars. It really helps others find us. Big shout out to our producer, Mina Vazarian, and our editor, Carlos Luna. They're the real magicians here. If you're not a part of our exclusive Patreon community yet, head on over to patreon.com/the Lot 1 podcast. That is the Lot and the number 1 podcast for early access, bonus content like the after show, and more. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to our incredible Patreon supporters. Your backing keeps the Lot 1 podcast lights on. Connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at the Lot 1 podcast. That is the Lot number 1 podcast for behind the scenes content and updates. We're now accepting listener mail, everyone. So if you got any questions for us or a guest, drop us a line. Also, if you're interested in finding out more about Lot 1 Productions and all we've got going on, check us out at lot1productions.com. Again, that's lot number 1 productions.com. Until next time, folks, keep those creative fires burning, dream big, and remember, the filmmaking journey is a ride worth taking. See you next week.